Um, so chapter 6 is about texture. We're going to do a really quick and fun project at the end of the week that deals with texture. And really, basically, you're just going to make a couple of textures and you're going to collect a couple of textures and collage them into a composition. So that'll be fun. But let's go look at what textures like. I'm going to do share screen and do a PowerPoint presentation. And so it is going to be death by PowerPoint, and I'm sorry about that, but it had to happen. So here we go. As I share my screen, where's my PowerPoint? There we go. Okay, so trying to get this thing going. So please read chapter 6 on texture. It's going to be part of the final quiz that we're going to have on Monday, next Monday. Next week is our final exam week at the college, and so final exams are scheduled for Monday and Tuesday, although your teachers may have them online, so you might even be able to take them over the weekend. And our quiz is going to be 20 questions, multiple choice on the chapters on shape, value, and texture. So chapters 4, 5, and 6 is what is going to be dealt with the quiz. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about texture. Texture is fun. This is a painting. Now I know this looks like a photograph, or maybe if you have really, really good eyes, this looks like a painting. This is like a super realistic painting. And this is kind of an homage to still life painting from the history of Western art, where you have a bowl of fruit and you paint the bowl of fruit, and it's very nice. It sits on a table, and that's a really cool thing. And this, of course, is a very contemporary kind of bowl of fruit because there's only a couple pieces of fruit left. It looks like it's been pretty picked over. But what a what a wonderful set of visual effects this painter is able to do with a glass plate that is kind of like a carved from the bottom side glass plate with um, grapes and a cut up lime on the plate. You get to really see the care that this person has taken in examining the surfaces of the grapes, both in the colors, but also in the textures of the grapes and how they reflect light. There's all of these hot um, photographic highlights on all of the grapes, and of course, hot photographic highlights on the top surfaces of the lemon too. The lemon has a certain amount of translucency to it, and so we see the light going into the lemon and then shining through the lemon. On the non-lit side, the grapes are not nearly so translucent, but the plate is marvelously so. It's both translucent and it has lots of interesting reflections on it that only glass can make. So this person is really interested in taking a deep dive into the kinds of textures that give us all kinds of sharply defined detail about objects. And so texture is the fifth element of art. We've talked about line, shape, value, texture, and then the final thing we'll talk about is color next quarter in the color theory class in Art 116. But let's talk for a minute about texture. Texture is the tactile. Tactile refers to the touch experience, to the sense of touch. And so tactile is a word you're going to want to know because it's going to be on the quiz. So touch, I'm sorry, this painting, although it isn't a super realistic painting by Andrew Wyeth from 1943, it still can evoke definitely a completely different sense of texture than that bowl of fruit did in the previous slide. We get a sense of the dry and a sense of the crunchy and a sense of the wrinkled and rough nature of the tree and its bark, the dried leaves, and all of this brown, just giving us a sense of late autumn on the forest floor, and really relating to our knowledge of crunchy leaves and our sense of touch and texture that we have learned through experience over the years. And so, next slide. Okay, that's it. Let's see. So sculptors can create and replicate texture in the use of materials and the degree that they create characteristic textures of the subject. Okay, that's cool. We've got this sculpture here that's 350 years old. It's a clay sculpture done by a German sculptor. And, you know, he was commissioned to do a portrait of this fancy rich lady, which he did, which is really nice, but it's clay. And it's so interesting to see the textures that he was able to achieve with the clay. We can go in here and with the way that the light is shining off of here, we can see the texture of flesh, human skin, human flesh. And we can even see the texture of the flesh of somebody who's about middle-aged. This person is 35 or 40 years old, and you can see that the skin is just starting to wrinkle just a little bit. We have just a little bit of fullness of flesh. We can see a little bit of the wrinkles, you know, just kind of starting to happen in the neck and stuff. And so it's a beautifully tender portrait of this person, but we can really see just in the way that he works with the texture that the flesh is unique and different from the hair, which has this wonderful hair texture in it. The straight hair being pulled back into a bun or possibly a ponytail in the back, and seeing that in contrast to the curls that have been done with a curling iron running down both sides of the face to frame the face. And again, we get a sense of the hair texture even in the curls, which is wonderful. And then coming down here into the garment that she has tied tightly across her bodice, we can see that this even has a slightly different texture to it than the flesh does, and it's different than the hair. This is drapery folds, but the drapery feels like it's kind of a crunchy, crisp fabric. It doesn't feel like it's something super soft or luxurious like, I don't know, a satin or a silk. It feels a little bit more like a linen in that it has a little crispier texture to it. And this artist is able to really bring us right into those different materials, the flesh, the hair, and the linen of this costume, just in his careful attention to fine detail in the texture of things. Now we come back to the 20th century and see when people are just playing with abstract expressionism, where they're just expressing stuff for the sheer fun of throwing paint and texture onto a canvas or a support. And so we've got Gary Lau's piece here. And regardless of which edition of the book you have, you're going to get some kind of an example of really crazy texture that's non-objective and non-representational. So we just get this whole batch of stuff here. And I love the close-up here because the little white things sort of look like bones or skulls or something that's in here. And he's got a lot of other stuff piled up in here and lots of little linear texture that's kind of threads and strings and stuff in here. And the threads and strings are different colors and that kind of thing. And it's just a wonderful melange of textures kind of piled up. And so the whole painting is really just about texture. It's only to really get you excited about and thinking differently about texture and how, you know, a painting on the wall doesn't necessarily have to be an image. It can be something that is all about texture instead, which is kind of a cool idea. So texture, the nature of texture, you know, the sense of touch informs us about our immediate and intimate surroundings. The tactile experience is deeply integrated into our language. We've got a bunch of words in the English language that deal with qualities of texture. And here's just a couple of them: smooth, rough, hard, soft, but many, many, many different words, verbs, adjectives, adverbs talking about the quality of a texture. So that's really cool. And finally, the third bullet point here is that the touch experience, the tactile experience, is both intellectual and emotional. So we can see and we can analyze what the texture is, but also there's going to be an emotional quality to some textures. Some textures are wonderful, luxurious. They make us feel great and inspired and in love and everything. And some textures are awful and scary and nasty and just terrible. And we're gonna, see that texture is one of the ways that we can touch the viewer's experience with texture to get them to have a both an intellectual and an emotional reaction to texture. Um, this chapter talks about 4 different kinds of textures. Basically, it introduces us to 4 different ideas of texture in art and design, and so we're going to talk about those in the next several slides. The first thing is actual texture, and leading up to this, we've looked at a couple of pieces that had actual texture, but this Maori carving from a house post in New Zealand is another example of actual texture. This is a piece of wood that has been carved into an ancestral figure. And so we see all of these spirally textures filled with dots and linear forms and stuff. And in between them, there are highly polished sanded surfaces that are nice and smooth. And so we get a range of textures in something like this. And so an actual texture is the real thing. It is the material that is present and you can reach out and touch it. So an actual texture is the real thing that can be touched. Okay. So papier-collé, originated with Picasso and Braque. At the beginning of the 20th century, they were really doing lots of experimentation in Cubism and taking deep dives into what is the meaning of painting and what are different kinds of abilities or approaches to paint and painting. And so here's a Cubist painting by Picasso that also has the addition of real textures that have been glued onto its surface, or in this case, also glued around the outside of the surface. So we've got real piece of rope that's been nailed to the outside of the canvas, the stretched canvas, and that gives us, another texture to play with. But there's this piece of chair caning in here that's kind of fun. So he's taking the idea of, again, the artistic conceit, the artistic tradition of a still life, of objects on a table, like a bowl of fruit. Well, here's a little bowl kind of a form, and the pitcher that might be on the, a pitcher and a bowl, on the table with maybe a couple of other things on the table. Oh, look, here's a piece of pie over here, or something like that. Oh, here's some fruit over here. Anyway, they're all broken up, and in his analytic Cubist period, this would have been like from analytic Cubism, and it is from about 1912. But we have the addition of this actual piece of chair caning that has been glued in here too, which is a beautiful, wonderful concept to give us a sense of real texture collaged into the other texture. And so, collage is something that we've been dealing with here in the design class. And I just wanted to show you that Picasso and Braque and others, famous artists, have also dealt with and originated collage in the painting process. Collage developed into assemblage during the 20th century. And assemblage, like collage, happens when 3-dimensional objects are glued or fastened onto a painting surface or support. So assemblage can also be used to create 3-dimensional sculptures that are standalone sculptures in the round too. But we're looking at a Robert Rauschenberg painting from the 1950s. And Rauschenberg was an abstract expressionist American painter in the 1950s. And his approach to abstract expressionism can be seen in the paint application that you can see in areas of this painting, where he's taken a paint with a brush with paint on it and smashing it into the thing to make brush strokes, which is really nice, and taking some paint and putting it on the canvas so thick that it also runs, so that we see the drip runs of paint in the background, which is a different texture of paint. We see him collaging things into the background, like lots of labels off of different soap boxes or tin cans or something like that. And here's a little texture that is very, very reminiscent of corrugated cardboard. It looks like he might even be using corrugated cardboard as a printmaking material, where he's maybe even printing with the corrugated cardboard dipping it in paint and pressing it up against the background. But the thing that in here that is assemblage is the actual use of this dead bird, this crow that has been taxidermied and then fastened onto the surface of the painting. So, this is a real dead bird. It's sticking out, a foot out of the front of the painting. And then this actually down here off the painting, hanging off the edge, is a pillow tied up with a piece of ribbon or string that's attached to a stick. And this is a real stick. So it's a wooden stick glued onto the surface of the painting, and then a real pillow suspended down below the painting. And the wings of the bird are kind of hanging down like this at certain angle, and the pillow tied in the middle has its two lobes kind of hanging down at a certain angle. So this form kind of replicates what this form is doing up here. And there's a lot of other things. The end feathers in the wings kind of pick up on some of these linear elements that are up here in the painting, and some of these linear textures that are back here. So there are a lot of textures and forms that are being expressed in a lot of different ways, but there's similar ideas in the painting that help unify the painting together. But this gives us a sense of collage and assemblage in which we're dealing with real objects that have real textures in a painting. Now, the second kind of texture that I want to talk about is simulated texture. And simulated texture is pretty much like the first slide we looked at, the super realistic painting. And here's another painting that's a kind of a photorealistic painting, or at least an homage to that kind of thing. It's called Simulation. And what's so interesting about the painting is that we have a painting within a painting. The entirety of this image is a painting. So we've got the painting of a painting canvas sitting on an artist's easel here. And all of the textures and all of the forms have been very painstakingly represented so that they will fool the eye, so that you feel like you could actually reach in there and touch some of these things. Things that look like rusty steel, have a real dry feel to them, and they look like rusty steel. And things that look like metal, and things that look like glass. And all of those things that can fool the eye is a painting technique called trompe-l'oeil, which is French for fool the eye. Trompe is fool, and l'oeil is the eye. And so this painting technique is all about trying to make you think that you're looking at something that is real, when indeed it is a careful simulation of that thing. So all of that is in the painting, within the painting. And then in the background, painted with just a little bit less care, is what would have been in the artist's studio, the actual still life set up in the artist's studio. But it's so interesting that the painting has more of a sense of reality than the reality in the background does. He's flipping this thing. He's kind of doing a twist on the idea of trompe-l'oeil and fool the eye to make us think that the painting is even more real than the still life that it was derived from. Interesting concept. Simulated texture is the simulation of real textures so that it attempts to fool the eye. And you want to know that, it's going to be on the quiz. Okay, abstract texture. Abstract texture. We've got a theme going here, and it seems to be still life on a tabletop. And so Roy Lichtenstein was an artist, a pop artist from the 1960s and 70s. And here Roy is doing an homage to Pablo Picasso. This feels very much like a synthetic cubist painting that Picasso would have done in the 1930s. And so it's really interesting to look at the abstract texture that's featured in the painting. When we look at this still life, and it's abstracted, and it's a cubist abstraction, so you're going to have to bear with me because it takes a while to figure this out. We have a tabletop, and we're looking down at objects on the tabletop that are in a still life, like a bottle of wine, or a guitar sitting on the table, perhaps a golf club, or some cards, or an open book that's open on the table. And then there's some stuff in the background like drapery or wallpaper on the wall or some other stuff that's in the composition. But basically, this is the idea of a still life where you have a bunch of interesting objects placed together on top of a table, and then you paint them. And it's something that an artist would do. Let's look here at this example of wood texture, which is just weathered barn siding wood texture, to remind us that wood texture has grains that are parallel to each other, and that sometimes when you go around a knot in the wood, that the grains travel around the knot in the wood. And that's what Lichtenstein is doing here with the tabletop and the guitar. And in fact, the guitar and the tabletop have kind of been run together in the same kind of a texture. So it's hard to see where the tabletop ends and the guitar starts, except for this one little white contour line here that just describes enough of the outside shape of a guitar so that we can see, oh yeah, over here, this is supposed to be the guitar, and the rest of this wood textured stuff are the edges and the top of the table. So that's abstraction, because the elements have been simplified and slightly rearranged in the composition, just like, you know, our definition of abstract is to simplify and or slightly rearrange the elements in a composition. Lichtenstein has done it here for us. Okay, the final kind of texture that I want to talk about are invented textures. So invented textures are without precedent. Sorry about this. This is supposed to be one word, not two, without. They're original textures from the artist's imagination, or they're a product of the creative process. They are not derived from the observation of nature. So this thing here, this illustration of a reclining nude on a couch, is from 1971. And that's really important because back in the late 1960s and early 70s, at the beginning of the computer age and at the beginning of computer graphics, you had to program a computer on punch cards and then feed the punch cards, a whole big stack of punch cards, into the IBM mainframe computer so that it could read all the punch cards and read your computer programming to then try to create or either do the math problem that you want it to solve or do whatever other operation you were wanting it to do. And so to try to computerize a photograph is what we've wound up here with. And so looking way over here in the upper left-hand corner, we can see that some of these elements are simply made up of horizontal or vertical line segments, or diagonal line segments, or dots. Those are the only elements that we have to work with. And as you combine and recombine those simple mark-making elements that the computer can do, you wind up with very complicated textures that are created in the composition. And so the photograph of the reclining nude could be translated by the computer into this chicken scratch kind of interesting texture that had never been seen before, never been done by anybody else. It's here for the first time. And that is the invented texture. I'm not here to show you the nude. I'm here to show you this really, really cool texture that is creating the illusion or the image, the very faint image of the reclining nude. And it's this invented texture that we want to be the takeaway from this discussion. Your authors go on to talk about texture used in a composition. And so why don't we look at a Picasso painting? Heck, why don't we look at a Picasso painting from his synthetic cubist period from the 1930s. In fact, here's one from 1929. And so again, we have a tabletop. There's a still life with a bunch of stuff on top of the table. And he's making lots of jokes here because we have a dead chicken on the table, which is kind of, you know, the ultimate still life because it's kind of still death right here. But we've got a bowl of fruit on the table and a pitcher on the table and all of the other elements that you'd have in a still life. Maybe somebody's in the kitchen and they're going to prepare dinner, and so they've got this chicken that they're about to butcher and all of these vegetables that they're going to cook up and make chicken dinner out of. And isn't that wonderful? This participates in the tradition of the still life painting. But it's so funny because he's playing with us in terms of form and most importantly with texture. I want you guys to unmute your mic and just shout into the computer if you can see what's going on underneath the table. Can you guys see or identify what this object is that's kind of been cubist, broken apart into geometric forms? And tell me if this texture that's kind of on the outside of some of these forms informs you about what this object is that's standing underneath the table. Did I lose you guys? Can anybody see what this might be? It's very interested. It's alive. It's very interesting. What's that?
It sort of looks like an animal opening its mouth.
Perfect. Beautiful. You got it. Okay. It is a dog. And this dog, with its tongue hanging out and its two eyes right here, and this little triangle that kind of gives us a sense of the dog's ear, there's a dog standing underneath this table, and we can see the legs of the dog and the body of the dog. And the only reason we'll know it's a dog is because it's outlined in this texture that is reminiscent of fur. And so, oh my gosh, there's that dog underneath the table, and it really is very much interested in that chicken. In fact, if we don't stop that dog, it's going to jump up and grab that chicken and run off with it to chomp on it himself. Now let's go back up into the chicken, because the chicken is dealing with textures too. Let's look at the textures that are in the body of the chicken, or especially these wings, these wing elements here. These are kind of like wing feathers in the chicken, very similar to the wing feathers that we just saw in the black bird, the crow that was in Lichtenstein's painting. No, not Lichtenstein. Rauschenberg's painting. And so again, these feathers really do tell us that this is a chicken. Of course, we have the chicken's head right here, which is the dead giveaway of a chicken. But that combined with these feathers are enough information to show us the abstraction of chicken and let us know that this is a chicken dead on the table, and this is a dog very interested in eating that chicken underneath the table. It's very, very cool composition here. Okay, finally, the psychological factors of texture is something that is interesting. So when you get a painting like this, you look at this, and the colors and the forms and the texture give us a sense of foreboding. And I don't know why, but the first thing I see when I look at this, I get this terrible sense of death and foreboding. This is a door, and there's this little creepy hand kind of coming in from the side. So we don't know who this person is, and all we see is their disembodied hand on the frame of the door. And there's this big spray of flowers in the middle of the door, but the flowers don't feel like that they have very much life left in them. They feel kind of dry and lifeless on the door. And there's all of this crackly texture, nasty texture and everything on the door. And finally, I realized that this feels a lot more like a coffin lid, or a casket, than a door or a doorway. And it feels like if you go through this door, you might be going into death or another dimension, rather than just walking into somebody's apartment or house. So these textures, they can provoke an emotional response that can be pleasant or unpleasant. Textures are associated with our past personal experiences, and sometimes textures are part of some pretty profound experiences, both positive and negative, that you can have. If any of you guys, have gone to Halloween haunted houses in the past, where you've been blindfolded and have had your hands thrust into a bowl of cold, spaghetti and Jello and everything else, and told that it was a bunch of brains, that textures can leave a lasting effect in your memory. So we want to keep in mind how powerful textures are for artists and designers to be able to deal with. Okay, and this is and finally, because I wanted to do and finally. So and finally, the last thing in here is how texture can define depth of space in a composition. And we're really going to be dealing with this next quarter. So in color theory, we're going to be talking about this quite a bit. But right now we have more vivid colors and higher contrast and sharply defined detail in the foreground of this landscape painting. And then the colors start to fade, and the textures start to fade or are out of focus, and the contrasts are less in the middle ground space in the painting. And when you go to the far depth of the painting, there is very little contrast of color, texture, or anything back here. It's completely faded out and fuzzed out so that it's not in sharp focus at all. And this is how the landscape painters of the 19th century were able to show us these vast American landscapes as the American West was being opened up to Europeans who were coming in to settle this landscape. And so once again, sharply focused details, high contrast of values, light and dark, and full spectrum intensity colors are in the foreground. And then all of that stuff fades out as you move into the background. And so that's how texture can play a role in creating a sense of depth in a composition. Okay, I'm going to come back to you guys because you guys want to see me. So I'm going to stop the screen share if it will let me, and welcome you. I'm going to make sure that Jordan gets points for being here today. Where's Bright? There we go. Okay, so I recorded this. I'm going to post this so that you guys can see it. But this pretty much deals with the 4 different kinds of texture that is introduced in the chapter on texture. And we're going to start a tiny little fun project on Wednesday that deals with texture. So that's good. Our Quizzy Quiz will come next Monday during finals week, where you're going to take 20 questions, multiple choice quiz on the chapters on shape, value, and texture. So chapters 4, 5, and 6, we're going to do a little quiz on Monday, and then you'll be gone. You'll be out of here. So tonight, this afternoon, please finish up your value study drawings, and please make sure that they are uploaded into coursework along with your value scale. These were 2 separate projects that I wanted you guys to do, and this drawing is worth 40 points. So it's a big damn deal. So please get this done and get it uploaded. I do not expect you to have a value drawing as elaborate as this one, but I do want you to be able to apply the values from a value scale onto the drawing and try to attempt to find a huge range of values in the portrait that you're drawing of yourself. And get that uploaded by tonight because it'll be due at midnight. And so I've been talking for 40 minutes. I'm going to say goodbye for now. If you need to review this video, it will be up and it will be posted for you to review. I'm going to say goodbye, but you guys can check out of here, and anybody who has a question can remain and unmute your mic and ask me a question. Otherwise, goodbye for now. I guess, oh, Ezra.
Yes, I have a bit of a question. Having a hard time getting the very dark darks with the graphite on the paper. Like a very dark color. It's all just sort of the high, dark black, but not quite as dark as it could be.
Okay. It's not coming through real clear, but I'm hearing that you're having difficulty with getting the range of values, that you can't get your black enough.
Yes.
Okay, that's okay. I cheated a little bit with this, and so I started to use my pen to try to get the blackest blacks possible. So I'm using graphite to get these medium tones, but I'm really using a pen down here to get the really, really deep tones. And you can see the 2 different approaches to value, using graphite on the upper one and using pen on the lower one. So it would not hurt my feelings if you wanted to just jump in to get the blacker tones and to get stronger values using a pen in addition to graphite. If you want to, that would be just fine. You're taking a little bit of a chance, and it's scary when you start it, but it actually does work. And if you do have blacks that you really need to get really dark black and in sharp contrast to everything else, that's the way to go with ink. So give that a try. Thanks for asking. I'll see you guys later. I'm checking out now. See you on Wednesday.